Hey everyone, Kristen here. I just have a couple of announcements. Our Path is searching for a new executive director. This volunteer position is essential to Our Path and the services we provide to straight partners and partners of trans people. If you're interested in learning more about this position, please email the board of directors at board@ourpath.org. And I would like to take a moment personally to thank some very special people, our donors. You make this podcast possible. We incur expenses related to production, recording, and editing, and your support means we can continue bringing you this content. On behalf of myself, the RPATH staff and board of directors, and thousands of listeners, your support is greatly appreciated. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our Voices, the podcast for straight partners and partners of trans people by Our Path. I'm your host, Kristen Cowley. Our guest today is Ann Anderson Evans. Ann is a writer, linguist, and former professor, among other things. She's twice divorced and once a widow, a mother, and grandmother. She has traveled and lived in many countries and speaks 6 languages. Her first memoir, Daring to Date Again, won multiple prizes for memoir, and a short story was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. She grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, and now lives and works in Vermont. Welcome to the podcast, Ann. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, 6 languages? I'm a little in awe and a little bit envious as well. I barely speak a second, if that's generous, saying barely speak. So well done. And thanks for being on the show today. Before we start, I just want to just give our little advance notice to our listeners that today's podcast is going to have topics of suicide. So if that is a sensitive subject for you, just take note and have care for yourself around the topic. So, Ann, I really want to start off today's podcast by reading the first line of your memoir, if that's okay. And tell us the title of your memoir, if you would.
The Sweet Pain of Being Alive.
The Sweet Pain of Being Alive. So if you're okay, I'm going to read the first couple of sentences.
Okay.
And by the way, for our listeners, Terry is Ann's husband at the beginning of this memoir. I never worried that Terry would leave me. Having married in our 60s, we felt we'd captured an unexpected shower of fairy dust. For all our 14 years together, we frequently joined hands for a warm, smiling moment. We were so lucky to have each other. But one night, Terry did leave me. He placed a plastic bag over his head, the thin kind, used to bag vegetables in the grocery store. That opening line and scene from your memoir took my breath away. And grabbed me. And I'm hoping that we can talk about your marriage to Terry and his suicide. By first, just if you would be so kind as to tell us how you met Terry, how your relationship unfolded, and then we'll come back to his parting. Yeah.
Yes. So we met online. Mm-hmm. My first book is called Daring to Date Again, and it was about what happened when I dated at 60. Mm-hmm. And after a couple of years of that, I'd had so many goodbyes, Mm-hmm. Every time you meet somebody new, you think, oh, this is going to be great. No, it doesn't work out that way. Mm-hmm. And I, most of the time. So I thought, I'm fine by myself. I don't need to spend all my time online. And I was about to sign off the last site when I saw this photograph. And the man, he just looked so kind. So was not full of himself. He wasn't handsome, but he looked curious. And his photograph just struck me. Mm. So I wrote him a note and I said, we're both college professors. That doesn't mean we have anything in common, but it would be interesting to find out. And he told me the next day when he responded that I was at the top of his to-do list.
Cheeky.
He would have written me the next day if I hadn't written him. Mm. So that was a good sign. Mm-hmm. And we were both busy for the next couple of weeks, which felt good to me. I wasn't rushing into something. I relaxed for a while before we met. And the first time we met, it was a full-throated conversation from then until his death. Mm-hmm. We were just fit together beautifully.
Could you describe what he was like as a husband?
He was a wonderful husband. Well, there were problems, but he always gave me the feeling that he was looking after me. Mm. He would find surprises for me. He knew me well enough to know what I liked and what I didn't like. And he would surprise me with a concert or various things. Mm. And so I had the feeling that he was watching me and taking care of me. And when I was sick, he was a wonderful nurse. And we had so much fun together. We both loved to cook. He'd cook one night, I'd cook the next. And it was always a subject of conversation. What are we going to have tonight? Lobster, wow. Or, some experimental thing or whatever. And we ate in some of the finest restaurants in the world, traveled all over Europe, drank wonderful wines, had friends, gave dinner parties. He was a professor of finance at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken. He'd been the teacher of the year twice. And I was teaching freshman English at Montclair State University. So, we had a lot in common. And we always got along. We never argued. He was a wonderful husband. Our sex life was not very good.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in your memoir. Can you tell us a little bit about the mismatch there?
So that was really the problem. He wanted to have regular sex, and we did have regular sex, but I never knew what he liked. They say, well, try lingerie, try dancing to music. I don't know, whatever. And it never seemed to resonate with him. Mm. He always was very affectionate with me. And the most wonderful part about him physically was he never turned away from me, not even when he was asleep. Mm. If I touched him in his sleep, he would respond by holding my hand or whatever. So this is what got us through our time together, this tremendous affection and love for each other.
So would it be fair to say that you had an intimate connection and a closeness, but then the sexual piece, which maybe is a little more, rowdy and and hot and heavy, was maybe not there, and you were trying to figure out how to ignite the spicier part of the relationship, and kind of like, okay, if I try this, and nothing really worked to ignite that for him.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because very early in our relationship, I said to him, we're really good at intimacy, but not that great at sex.
Mm. Did he agree with that? Did he?
Yeah.
Did he? Okay, he did.
Yeah.
And did he kind of want to find a solution to that, or was he content with the way that things were unfolding?
So, this is very difficult to parse. And I can only give my take on it.
Right, of course.
He was always trying to please me. Mm. But he didn't have the usual instincts that men have. Mm. And so it was hard for him to know, I think, what I would like. And he was always trying to please me. I was always trying to please him. But with someone who is so confused about his gender, there's very little place to meet in the middle.
Right.
And so that I don't know. I still am quite confused about what was going on. I don't
Well,
know.
since you mentioned gender and his gender confusion, let's go ahead and start to talk about this. So you find a box of clothes. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about that?
I want to say something to you
Hmm.
first before I do tell it.
Yeah.
I have this feeling talking to this group of people who are listening
Hmm.
in a way that I don't talk to just the general public, that they will understand, I think.
Yes.
I sometimes tell people that the hardest thing about mourning him is the person I'm mourning is not who he really was.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it was an illusion.
Right.
And I pay attention to my dreams because I think they inform you of things. And I had a dream once where I was floating in space. I had on a spacesuit and I couldn't see anything anywhere where I looked. I couldn't change my trajectory. There was nothing to hold on to, nothing to touch, nothing to see, nothing to hear.
Mm.
And I had this disattached feeling. And I think that is a good explanation of how I feel about Terry. I thought something was there, but it wasn't. And I was looking for the wrong thing, and I was sort of floating um, unattached. And I suppose he had a similar feeling.
Mm.
So anyway,
Well, I just
you
want
were,
to I want to take a moment to just if it's okay for me to respond to that.
yeah,
I think you're right in that this audience that you're talking to does understand, because the audience is primarily straight people, straight identified people, however you prefer to say it, who have discovered that their spouses are LGBT through a manner of avenues. And that feeling that your dream so eloquently captures of being sort of untethered and feeling like there's nothing really concrete to tie to, I think is probably really common, and a lot of listeners can relate to that.
yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right in understanding this audience. Yeah.
The
So
difference
yeah.
between having a gay spouse or a partner,
Hmm.
someone you discover is gay, and in my generation, lots of men did that. They wanted a
Yes.
family, they had to
Hmm.
get married.
Yes.
So it's not so serious right now. But if it's an issue of gender, it's not only him that's changing, it's you that's changing. I become a lesbian, you know?
Right. A de
And
facto lesbian.
that's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the public, I become a lesbian.
Right.
And, I have no idea. This is something I never, ever considered.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of tension that is not there when just one of you has this mismatch. Um,
So I hear what you're saying about that when it's both of you, when someone is transgender, it's a transition for both partners. Um,
and I believe that
mhm.
Terry, as he came close to the point where he knew he was going to kill himself, had to make this choice. Am I going to say to Anne, either I die or you become a lesbian, putting our whole marriage in jeopardy,
Mhm.
or he would succumb to his suicidal thoughts? And he decided to die instead. That going through transition at his age was in his middle 70s. Uh, I don't know how that would have even worked. I know I would have tried to stay with him,
Mhm.
but it's very complicated, very difficult.
Yeah.
So I don't know what would have happened.
So can we walk through what was
Oh, you
started?
started
Mhm.
the box of clothes.
Yeah, like let's walk through what started to happen in the marriage so that because I think a lot of people will relate to the patterning that showed up.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've been told that this pattern is very common
yeah,
by people who are in this
yep.
line of work.
Hmm.
So um, he was in bed with sciatica, and I had to vacuum the room. So he'd put away boxes under the bed, and he was kind of, he has one of those offices where the newspapers are piled on each other and books everywhere and whatever. But I didn't want the boxes under the bed, and I'd never asked him about them. And I reached under and I pulled one out and lifted it up. I was going to say, what is this? Can we put it in the warehouse or, what? But it was a box of women's clothes. Not just women's clothes that I recognized from the 1950s. Polyester blouses with a little raised collar and bows and, some psychedelic stuff, and shoes that were size 12, which was Terry's size. This is Terry's clothes, not his mother. I thought, did he keep a box of his mother's clothes? Why would he do that? And forgive me, everybody, but the first thought that came to my head was the last scene of Psycho, where the guy is sitting there in his mother's clothes.
Yeah, that's your reference point.
That was my reference point. Yeah. I mean, I ask forgiveness for that, but that's what I'm honest about, and that's what I thought of. If he kept his mother's clothes, God, what am I getting myself in for here?
And were you married at that point, or?
Yes, we married
you were.
For years.
Yeah. And this is just for the listeners to have a little bit of a time set. This is, what year would you say this is roughly?
It's 2008.
2008. Okay, got it. Yeah. So you find the box of clothes.
So I find the box of clothes, and I said, "What is this?" And he didn't like being caught out. He was kind of really awkward and uncomfortable. We said, "Oh, that's something I used to do, something I just experiment with it every once in a while, wearing women's clothes." And I was dumbstruck. I didn't know what to say, because my vision of a man wearing women's clothes is like Monty Python, or maybe Giuliani, who was entertaining people by showing up. And if Terry had tripped across the floor in, heels and bra and panties, my first reaction would be laughter, because that's what I've been trained by, television and movies and everything to react. But I would, that would have been appalling. So he said, "I don't need them. I'll put them in the warehouse."
Okay.
And I backtracked, and I said, "Oh, well, it's not fair that women can wear men's clothes and men can't wear women's clothes. We wear pants, 100 years ago, women couldn't wear pants. And so it's just a cultural thing. And why shouldn't men be able to wear like silk and satin and beautiful jewels and stuff? It's not fair." And he knew I was kind of rationalizing. He just looked at me and he said, "If it were only a matter of logic." So that issue sort of disappeared. But later on, by not facing that, I think a psychiatric social worker friend of mine said once, "Imagine what it took for him to just get through every day, suppressing this person inside him." Of course, he'd been doing it since his mother had put a dress over his head for Halloween when he was 10. He marks that as the beginning of this interest.
Yeah, in the book, he says that his mom dressed him up for Halloween as a woman, and he liked it.
Yeah. Right. And it never went away. When he talked about the experimentation, he related it back to then at a later time.
Did he say at the time why he didn't tell you before you were married?
No.
Okay. I don't want to assume that there wasn't a great deal of shame and things like that.
I talked to somebody about this. I said, "Why did he choose me?" I mean, of all people in the world, who is like 99.7% heterosexual, why, straight? Why did he choose me? And my friend said, he knew what you were, and he chose you, and you don't know why, but it's not your fault. And I think he really wanted to be a good husband. On our honeymoon, he said to me, and can you imagine we didn't have sex on the first day of our honeymoon?
Neither did I. I was married to a gay man. The night after our wedding, no sex. The night of our wedding, rather, no sex.
Yeah. We're at this beautiful romantic place, and there's a fire in the fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
But he said to me, my mother would be so happy today.
Okay.
And he did not want to be this way.
Yeah.
He wanted to be a good husband, and he was a good husband. And so later on, another part of a pattern happened. This was another few years before this came out. He was overweight. Mm-hmm. He was 6 feet tall. He was as much as 280 and as little as 220. And he said he was struggling. He had struggled with his weight all his life. And now I look at it as an avatar for his gender struggle. And he said, I know what will keep me from gaining weight. I need to be punished. And he made a whip out of leather. They handmade it. And this was very creepy to me. Mm-hmm. And he said, he set up a whole schedule for when I would hit him with it. And I tried doing that. My arm would not go up to hit somebody I loved.
Yeah, in the book you talk about that Thursday nights, like if he hadn't met a goal weight if he'd gained weight on Thursday nights, that's when he asked you to essentially flog him with a whip.
So I told him, I said, I don't care if you're fat and you're healthy. Your cholesterol is better than mine. Mm-hmm. Your blood pressure is perfect. You're very healthy. I don't care. Don't worry about your weight. Because I was thinking he's thinking how attractive he is, and how whatever, he can't get clothes and that sort of thing. But, so I wasn't dealing with the underlying problem. And I could not do that. And he said, but you're doing me a favor. I said, I can't do it. And so I'd done it that once, and his weight was under control for 5 months.
Wow. So at the time, did you have a discussion that this is a kink, part of BDSM culture, or was he not framing it that way? Or did you see it that way? Like how are you making sense of this ask?
I took it as it came to me.
Okay.
This is what he wanted. I didn't compare it to anything. I know nothing about sadomasochism, not interested in it myself. I wouldn't have any idea how many other people did it. I've discovered a lot since then. So the 5 months came, whatever time it was, and he started gaining weight again. And he said, we'll have to set up this schedule. I said, I can't do it. And I called my friend Joan Price, who is she lectures all around the world on senior sex. But she's a sex expert, and you can't get through a luncheon with her without talking about vaginas. It's her mission in life is to make people sex positive. So I knew I could talk openly with her. And I said, I'm thinking of telling him that he could find somebody to do this, to whatever they call it, punish him. And I wouldn't stand in his way. I can't do it. And he's framing it as, if you loved me, you would do this. But I couldn't do it.
Did you write, if I could read a quote from the book about this. You said, I admired Terry for his strategy. He'd calculated that if he told me about this kink before we were married, I might seek another man, and he was right. My aversion to hurting someone I loved was so profound, and my underlying tenuousness towards marriage so fragile, that I would have continued with Marty. Marty was obviously somebody you were dating before. That would have been enough. And I want to ask about this a little bit, because I think a lot of people listening will relate to this feeling of, you said I admired Terry for his strategy, but did you feel betrayed at all? Because I think a lot of people have that experience of, had I known before we were married, I might have made a different choice. How did you feel about that?
Well,
Like, did you feel it was a manipulation? Because a lot of people listening do experience something similar as that.
I wouldn't phrase it that way.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I came to this marriage having had two catastrophic marriages before,
Mm-hmm.
other kinds of secrets
Mm-hmm.
that were revealed. So I wasn't all that surprised that something would come out because obviously I'm sure I've dated other men who had kinks that they hid.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something that this is scary stuff. If you tell a woman that you like whatever it is, I mean, one guy, when I was dating, I didn't have sex with this man, but he told me he liked to suck on toes.
Right.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
More disgusting than him sucking on mine was me ever sucking on his.
You were like, no, thank you.
And when I started to date again, I looked at hundreds of men's profiles and I accepted every touch that a man, whether it was email or whatever. I wanted to learn. I had been such a failure in my choices before. I wanted to learn what made men tick. What is the world really like out there? So I listened to stories, God, dozens, maybe hundreds of stories of people who had done the damnedest things and they were suffering.
Mm.
And for Terry to ask me to do this, he was suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved him. And I wanted to do everything I could without endangering my own love for myself, my own
Right.
vision of myself.
Right.
So I told him that I would have no objections if he found Joan Price told me there are people who are pros at this. She goes to all these sex con, or I think it's called, or conferences, knows a lot of these sex workers. She said they're professionals, they're sex workers. They don't always have sex with the person that they're punishing. Mm-hmm. And so, you can find somebody. And I told Terry that he could do that and I would not stand in his way. And he looked at me thunderstruck. He said, "You'd let me do this?" I said, "Yeah. If that's what you need, that's fine. I can't do it. So find somebody else." And the next day, he found somebody else.
Okay, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he found a professional sex worker who specialized in this. And he drove to Brooklyn and he came back. He was kind of sheepish when he came back, but it helped him.
Okay. That was my next question. Did it seem to make a difference?
Do we call this a kink? That somebody needs this to regulate whatever is causing him such suffering? Mm. So, okay. Then, I guess this was, my chronology is probably wrong. I think he went to her once his weight was fine for a whole year. I don't remember exactly how long. I think he went a second time, but it was a long period of time in between. And then we came up to Vermont in our new house because I wanted a house in the country. And COVID happened. Mm-hmm. And we were out for a walk and he was very agitated. "What is the matter with you?" He said, this place in Brooklyn was called the Fortress, I think. Mm-hmm. And he said, "The Fortress is closed. I can't get there." And I said, "Well, if you can figure out something, I'll drive down with you in the same day. You don't have to feel that you don't, or find somebody in Vermont." But Vermont is a small state.
Right. The vast array of resources available in New York City and adjacent areas is probably not so easy to find in New England.
Not only that, but you might run into the person in the supermarket.
Right. That's another consideration. Right. Mm-hmm.
So he was without this resource. And I think it's just, so Jennifer Finney Boylan has written a very interesting book called She's Not There.
Yes, I've actually read that, and we've invited her on the show, but we were unable to get her. Yeah.
He said James Boylan, before the transition, said to himself, if I ever can find true love, all of this problem will go away. And he met the person who is still his wife.
Mm-hmm. She stayed. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And for many years, they were very happy together. But it came back. And I think this is what happened with Terry. He said, he was a terrible procrastinator. And I said, the only thing I know that you don't procrastinate about is me. From the first time we spoke on the phone, you were calling me every day. You'd sort of made up your mind. And I said, how do you explain that? And he said, it sounds very much like love, doesn't it? And I think he thought, like James Boylan, that if he found someone he really loved, that it would all get straightened out. Mm-hmm. And for many years, for several years, it was fine. I mean, our sex life was never great, but you fumble through it. And we were in our 60s. I don't know what sex is like for 60-year-old people. I know from Joan that she keeps telling people, keep on doing it.
Right. Use it or lose it.
But maybe it changes. Maybe this is sex and at 65, at 70.
Or maybe that was just sex with you and Terry.
Yes. So I didn't know. I didn't know that comparison. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, our marriage was very harmonious. We were the envy of our friends. Mm. They say, well, you and Terry are just so great together, and on and on. Mm-hmm. And we were for many years. And then the clothes came up, and the clothes stayed with him, but it didn't stay with me so much. I thought, well, some guys, more guys than you think, like to wear women's clothes. And I have friends who have stories like this of their husbands. And I did a test after Terry's death. I joined a group on Facebook that had like 14,000 women in it, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I asked the question, what would you do if your husband, after 3 years of marriage, told you that he liked to dress in women's clothes? So my reaction was, no. Mm-hmm. At least half of the women said, just don't use my shoes. Mm-hmm. Let's go shopping together. Mm-hmm. You know where my closet is. But they were treating it as foreplay, mm-hmm. As fun dress up.
Like their understanding of it was, this is just something that's adjacent to the bedroom, not that this is an identity.
Exactly.
This is a behavior versus an identity. And this is, while we're here, because this is something I was going to ask you about a little bit later on as we finished out kind of the story, but do you have sort of evidence or thoughts about whether Terry was simply interested in cross-dressing, which some might call a kink or a bedroom-adjacent behavior, versus being transgender, which is a whole other animal?
I don't think one would be tortured so by not being able to wear women's clothes. And I told him, I said, if you like to wear women's clothes, I'm sure there are groups of men around here who get together and dress up in women's clothes, and maybe their wives come along and, go for it. Go, if that's what you want, be in the Halloween parade, the Pride parade, wear whatever you want. But all of life in a married couple, all of life is foreplay, right? I mean, if a man does something that turns you off, that's going to turn you off for a long time.
Yes.
For a while. Mm-hmm. And so, I couldn't say, well, you can run around in women's clothes from Monday through Thursday and we'll have sex on. No, that is not how it works.
Right.
But if he needed this to be happy, go for it, fine. Mm-hmm. But he didn't do that. He did not want to go to a therapist. Mm-hmm. I mean, he really forcefully refused going to a therapist. He said, I've already been to therapists, but he'd never told them about his wish to be a woman. He'd never revealed that. He was terrified of being discovered.
Wow. Okay.
And I know that is, I know as much as I can know without him saying it, that is why he did not want to go to a therapist, because it would come out, especially knowing that I was open to things. I would press him for this. I think he realized that, and I realize it now. I would have pressed him about, what is this wearing women's clothes? Why are you doing it? And, the therapist, a good one, would be able to figure something out.
Right. And your being open about things did not necessarily give him permission.
No, not around
internal permission. Yeah.
Gave him permission to go and find other people who like to dress up as men and as women and spend, go away for a week with them if you want. I don't care. That's fine. I want him to be happy.
Yeah.
I don't want him to suffer.
Right.
But don't come tripping into my bed dressed as a woman, because it
was a boundary for you.
Onto that.
Yeah.
And it came to these points kept coming up where what he wanted me to do would have changed my nature. I do not hit or flog or bruise the people I love. This is against everything I believe. And he was asking me not to be me. And that was the boundary.
Yeah.
But if he goes out with other men and he dresses like that, that's not me. He's a man with me. And if he can be a man with me and a woman elsewhere, that's fine. But that was not the case.
So, okay. So I do think a lot of listeners who have transgender partners will relate to some of the things that you say here. One being that that their partner seemingly just hopes if they can find someone to love and to marry and to settle down and have a family, that it will calm down the inner need and drive for transition. And then the other thing is that tension between who the spouse is, what they prefer, what their boundaries, values, how they see themselves are, and what the transgender spouse is asking for them to show up as, do, etc. So that tension, I think, is really, really common.
Yeah, and it causes anger. But the biggest anger that I ever had against Terry, the only time, it causes anger, but Terry and I talked out things like this. That's why we had a very harmonious relationship. And I would tell him, I said what I felt, and he, would give his side. But the only time I ever lost my temper with him, ever, except over a game of Scrabble, but let's not get into that.
Scrabble is serious. I'm not really particularly a Scrabble player myself, but I do understand from those who love it that it's not a joke.
I'll tell you what happened. Terry was a numbers guy, he was had a brilliant brain. So like he could know where all 52 cards were when you were playing.
Sure.
I didn't really care where the 5 of clubs was. So I always lost, but I always lost differently every time. So it was fine. And I said to him once, let's play a game where I win, where I have the advantage. And that would be with words. So I got out my Scrabble game and I set it all up. And I put in my opening word, which is always like a 3-word, like the, just get the game started. And he went out.
So, definitely a pride wound there, a blow to the ego.
I am ashamed at my ego. I couldn't bring myself ever to bring, I struggle with, don't you struggle with your ego? Don't we all?
Of course, we all do.
And he's toying with my pride in a lot of different ways.
So what was the big fight that you got into the time that you were really angry? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was over housework.
Yeah.
So I've tried to explain this to I don't know how many men, and they either feign or truly do not understand it. with my second husband, I said, I'm not going to be the family slave anymore. I was always the breadwinner, but I wasn't the slave. And I told him, we're going to share the chores. And he said, oh, yes, I'm a feminist. We'll share the chores. And, he would do the laundry and clean the bathrooms or whatever it was. So Saturday came, work is all done, and I'm standing in the kitchen and thinking the refrigerator needs to be cleaned out. The front porch needs to be swept of the leaves on it. What else needs to be done? And he comes in and says, we're going to play baseball. The kids and I are going to play baseball. And I said, what about me? And he said, I've done everything on the list. And I think that moment was the end of my marriage.
The second marriage, yeah.
The second marriage. I stayed married to him for a while. I wouldn't divorce a person over that, but it was in my heart. It was the end of my marriage. After that, it was just, you're married because you were married to this guy. Because it was so callous, and yet it happened all the time. Other time, people have told me of coming home after a long day of work, and it's 7:00 at night, and the husband and the kids are playing video games and watching TV. Nobody's thought about dinner. So all of these things fall on the woman. And for people of my generation, and I'm told it's changed, I hope so. But the resentment builds up a lot over years and years. And here I'm with Terry, who's been a bachelor. This was the first time he'd been married. He had had other relationships, but he could cook, he could shop, he could do a lot of things. And so I thought, well, we won't have so much trouble. But it was about vacuuming, especially under the couch. It's dust bunnies under the couch. And the vacuum wouldn't, fit. So you have to go under there with a mop or something like that. And he said, oh, I have my back. I can't do it with my back. And well, okay, so you don't want to do the vacuum. How are we going to work on it? It just like, you expect me to do that? I've never done that. I don't wash windows. I don't, clean out refrigerators.
So there was a continued trend with Terry a little bit, at least a little bit. Yeah.
But I was talking to a man who had said to me such things as, I wish I could be a woman just for a day and see what it was like. Perfectly innocent comment, right? I mean, how do I know? I've never wanted to be a man for a day, but maybe people do, be interesting for some people. And I said, you think you know what being a woman is? You think wearing women's clothes is being a woman? It's nothing. Being a woman is having to do all the bad word stuff that other people don't want to do. The baby wakes at 4:00 in the morning and the man says, turns over in bed. He can go back to sleep.
Right.
Not me. All of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little insults over periods. If I hadn't been working full-time and supporting the family, I think I would have felt differently about it. But for people of my generation, you did everything. And I said, you want to wear a girdle and stockings, and the women are so damned happy they don't have to wear a girdle and stockings anymore. And, frilly little bras and stuff. No, women don't want to wear that stuff. It's your idea of what a woman is. It's not what a woman really is. And, I was furious, and I let out all of these thoughts to him. And he just sat there. He never rose up against me. Never, not once. And I think a lesser man might have returned my fury, but he didn't. He took it. And he said, all right, I tell you what I'll do. We'll get a cleaning lady. And when the cleaning lady didn't work out, because, spend as much time getting ready for the cleaning lady.
Yeah, you clean before the cleaning lady comes.
Yeah, and she does A, B, C, and D, but you really need E, F, G, and H done. So I said, I just don't want her anymore. He said, okay, I'll pay you what I paid her. And he would pay me every month. I think it was about $300 to do the housework. And I was completely mollified.
Okay.
It was fine.
Yeah.
Because he was recognizing.
Right. That it's a contribution.
Yeah. And he got the point. He didn't argue with me about it. Mm-hmm. And I think I've talked to women who have stayed with their husband through transition. Mm-hmm. And, it's like a full-time job for them. Mm. They feel, if you love somebody and he's in an endangered situation, and anytime a transgender woman walks out the door, she is potentially endangered. You want to be with him in restaurants and going shopping and everywhere, at least for the first few years until, it becomes regularized. Mm-hmm. And one woman, Leslie Fabian, who wrote another book called My Husband's a Woman Now, and tells about her role. She had to teach him how to dress, how to wear his hair, how to put on makeup, how, change his laugh, she was constantly working with him all the time to make it so that he could make this transition harmoniously without, bringing danger on himself, mm-hmm. herself by then. Mm-hmm. And plus there's all the recovery time from operations and, the research and going to the doctors. And, if Terry had decided to do this at the age of 75, I don't think I would have ever been able to write my books. My life would have been consumed with helping him do it. And I would have done it. Mm-hmm. But he knew all of this, I think he thought he was doing the right thing. And I think he really loved me. He really, really tried. And it's just terribly sad.
You think he thought he was doing the right thing by not transitioning?
By killing himself.
Yeah. By killing himself. Okay. So let's talk about that. So you open your memoir with that scene of finding him. Can you tell us about the night before?
Well, the day before, mm-hmm. Finally in the COVID lockdown, the tennis courts had opened. And he went out and he said he was playing tennis for 6 hours. He was not playing tennis for 6 hours. He couldn't have done that. I don't know where he was in those 6 hours. He'd played the day before, and usually we played together, but then he would find men to play with because he liked, the stronger competition. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, he met a guy on the court, and they said, let's play together. And I said, and how was he? He said, I could wipe the court with him. Mm. And this was not like Terry. He never made denigrating comments about anybody. To make that remark about any other human being was very unlike him. But, he was depressed. He didn't have anybody to play with. Mm-hmm. And he'd been waiting for this opportunity to get out there and, physically do something. And then we watched that night this television program about Lance Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, Terry was inconsolable, crying. He said, I can see why. Why for all his life? Why was all his life he can't compete? He said, he's the most beautiful athlete I ever saw. He was just so inconsolable that it didn't touch him. I didn't want to touch him. Mm. I waited a while before I embraced him and, calmed him. Then after that, he was, got over it. He'd never had an episode like that before, but, the lockdown and
yeah, we were all under stress. Yeah.
There were a lot of stress. And he was under extra stress that I knew about because he couldn't go to Brooklyn, to the Fortress. Mm-hmm. So I was really tired. I'd been working hard all day, and I went to sleep afterwards, or got in bed. And I was like half asleep when he came in with this radiant smile. And I looked at him, I said, what's up with you? Why are you so damn happy after being so sad? He said, It's fine. And he did not kiss me goodnight, which he always did. Not kiss, he just kissed me, good night. And he set up his CPAP machine, turned down the bed on his side, which is what he always did. And then he went in the other room, smoked a joint, and killed himself. I don't know what time, but it was that night. He didn't get up in the morning to go in and do it. I discovered him in the morning. So, he was bordering on out of control the night before. But then he was so happy. And now I realize, other people have told me about loved ones who have killed themselves and how happy they are just before they do it.
Yeah.
I have a friend in Austria who's my brother's best friend, killed himself. He had 2 small children. He was in his 30s. And I went to visit his wife afterward, and she said, we were so optimistic. He was feeling wonderful. He was himself again. He was laughing, and then boom.
Wow.
So, I wasn't unfamiliar with that situation.
But he turned down his bed, the side of the bed, and set up his CPAP machine almost like he was planning to come to bed.
So I talked to a policeman friend a while ago, and he told me that he was telling me another story. He said, I was leaving for home, and this guy comes and knocks on the window of my car. He says, my friend says he's going to kill himself. And, my friend is so exhausted, but he says, well, how can you turn him down? And I said, well, he might have killed himself afterward anyway. And he said, no, people who really do it don't tell you. And Terry had been planning this for years and years and years. And he did not want me to stop him. He had his mind made up. And that's why he put down the bed. Nothing to cause me any suspicion.
Okay.
I would go to sleep, and he would go in the other room and do what he did. And he planned it to be clean. So, I've had friends one friend's husband killed himself on the front lawn and left a note that he shot himself, so it would be very bloody. And he said, I didn't want to cause a mess inside. Terry didn't cause any mess. He thought it through. He'd said to me once, he had talked about suicide, probably more than most people do. But that means like once every 3 or 4 years, we would talk about suicide.
And what would he say about it when he talked about it?
He said very similar things to what my own mother said to me, which is why I didn't find it unusual. When she was like 85, she started telling me, I would say regularly, a couple of times a year, but maybe even more than that. If I am disabled, if I am, you have to decide whether you're going to put me on a machine or something, I want to go. I want to tell you this, and I want you to know this, so that when it happens, you don't say, I didn't understand it. I want you to know this. So I took it as sort of the same thing my mother was saying.
Okay. So what would he say, though? He was not imminently like your mother. Yeah.
No, he said, often couched in, if I ever get so sick. He also was well-versed in Japanese culture because he played the game of Go. And in Japan, and we discussed the game of Go and Japanese culture and where suicide fits in it. This is the kind of conversation we had. It wasn't about me committing suicide. It was like, oh, isn't this interesting what they say in Japan and how people do, different things all over the world. And I've heard that this and that. And he talked about, he would joke about it. One time he said, if I were ever, I think we'd seen A Star is Born, which is a very disrespectful representation. It's an easy plot twist, that he went, but it doesn't represent at all how people do that. He said, if I were going to commit suicide, I would probably walk up to the top of a mountain on a below zero day and just never come down. So a friend of my mother's did that. She put a dining room chair in her backyard when it was like 5 degrees, and that was the end. So, I said, oh yeah, that's interesting, because my friend did that. We had these back and forth conversations that were
That didn't give you any alarm.
They didn't know.
Yeah.
They gave my daughter alarm. Terry, someone had died of suicide. Maybe it was Robin Williams or something like that. My daughter was at the table, and Terry said, I think suicide is a perfectly honorable exit, if that's what you want. And my daughter got very upset, but I think it's an honorable exit too. I mean, my father was a Christian Scientist. He got cancer, colon cancer. It was 1966. He said, I don't want any medical attention. And he died in 4 months. This is a form of, it's your body.
Right. It's a form of agency. Yeah.
I was not angry with my father for doing that. He was living out his beliefs. And Terry had these beliefs about suicide. He did not believe there was a life after death, which is interesting because people who believe there's a life after death often hesitate because, if there is, maybe there is a hell and this suicide is not going to help you. But for a person who truly believed that you go back to the earth again and there's this cycle of life, when you're dead, you're dead. He didn't have that impediment.
So he did not. So we'll bring it around to how he died. If you're okay with that, how we began the podcast, which is how you found him with a plastic bag over his head, and which is not going up to a mountain on a cold day. And you found him. And do you mind? You wrote about it, so do you mind just telling us a little bit about what that moment, just your state of mind, really?
Yeah, I will, and I want to say one other thing. I was fascinated by who comes when somebody kills himself. Who are the the detective comes. Oh, that's interesting. And a detective wouldn't come if you died of a heart attack unless there's some suspicion. And that I started writing down who all the people were and what they did and how they acted. And the darling policemen who stood there like sentinels monitoring my every moment, and kind of directing traffic. And, how the choreography after a death, I was fascinated by it and I wrote it down. And that's how I started writing this book. So when I went into I woke up around 5:30, which is not unusual for me, but Terry wasn't in bed. He stayed up later than I usually, and the CPAP machine was there. So I thought maybe he had died. Otherwise, why wouldn't he come to bed? He'd never come to bed. I mean, it was one of the possibilities.
So you had that thought, yeah. Okay.
I had that thought. He might have fallen asleep, so I didn't immediately assume he was dead, but it was one of the possibilities that went through my head. I mean, he was 76 and, people can die at any moment. They can die at any age, at any moment. And if somebody who was 40 had put down the bed and not come to bed, I would have had the same idea. So I walked into his office and I saw him from behind and he looks perfectly normal sitting in the chair. But I noticed the bag on his head. And I went around in front of him and I looked and there was a band of plastic that had been pulled down below his chin. I thought maybe he hadn't meant to kill himself and that the band of plastic pulled down was him trying, but I thought, no, he was pulling it on, not trying to take it off. He was getting over that moment when your body becomes automatic, and tries to save itself. He pulled that down. So, and I was not surprised that he had killed himself because we had talked about it. I mean, I was shocked and wiped out, but I can't say that it was a big surprise that that's how he chose. Because I thought maybe he had discovered some health issue. I called his doctor in New Jersey, and I said, "Did he have some budding cancer or something? Some problem?" He said, "No, he was fine." So I didn't know. what the deal was. And then after the chaplain came, and he was just a totally different, set of beliefs. I'm a Buddhist.
Got it.
And evangelical chaplain doesn't, at a moment like that, he tried, but he just had nothing of interest to say to me. What could he tell me? I said to him, people of your faith believe that suicide is a sin, and you cause people like Terry untold suffering. And he said, well, we all have our own, he didn't know what to do. But I was in a state of real life. I am not holding anything back. This is the worst thing that could happen. And I'm not going to pretend. I'm going to tell him exactly what I think. And somehow he disappeared in the middle of
Yeah, right.
all of this. I don't know. I didn't shout at him or anything like this. I just told him what I thought. Maybe it was unkind, but I'm the one who's suffering here. So you have to forgive me.
And forgive me for asking this, but I read in your book that, and I think we kind of have to discuss it a little bit, that the detective asked if Terry had any history of autoerotic asphyxiation, which is, I think, the lead singer of In Excess passed away from. It is a thing.
It's enough of a thing, that they ask about it.
Yep.
When there is a death by asphyxiation. Of course, I'd heard of it, and I understood why he would say that, but I burst out laughing. This is the the old definition of la comédie, life, the comedy of life. And I'm, possible, but I think I probably would have known if he'd done that. I don't believe so. And there was that band of plastic, which was an announcement that this is what he intended to do. And he had said that if he reached a certain point, and it could have been a point of depression and not a point of physical illness, where he couldn't take it anymore, he accepted suicide. So I didn't really question it. And but that wasn't really what really got me. I just said to him, I don't think so. I think I would have known, but I don't think so. And then he was really uncomfortable, poor guy. And I started feeling sorry for him. This is hard. Being a policeman is a really hard job sometimes. And so the next issue was, did you ever hurt your husband? And that's when the tears started, they were in my belly button. They started rising. No, I would never hurt Terry. And given that he had asked me to hurt him at some point, it was doubly ironic.
Right.
But I wasn't going to talk to the detective about that. I said, no. Do you know anybody who wanted to hurt him? No. He was alone in his office at night. There was nobody else here and nobody else. No. And he said, I'm sorry to ask you these questions, but every suicide is considered a crime scene until proven otherwise.
Right.
And that just flattened me. Because I thought, there might be people who their loved one did die of suicide and they're charged with murder.
Yeah.
It happens with people, like when children die. How do you know?
Yeah.
And I became afraid. And I said, suicide's bad enough, but to be a murder suspect. And he laughed. He said, you're not a murder suspect. It's just, we have to do this.
You have to ask these questions. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like they come in, the EMTs come in and they put a sensor on his chest. And I said, what are you doing? He's stone cold. He said, we're required to do this. All these little required to do things that are, and you can understand it. I didn't give him a hard time about it or anything. Right. It just, Oh, I never thought of that. Yeah,
right? The
right.
procedural sort of
Yeah.
aspects of human passing. So this all happened during COVID, which was just a few years ago. How have you grieved and made sense of things from your perspective now?
Well, after Terry died, my son flew in from San Francisco, and he says, "I thought you'd be a basket case." I was pretty much a basket case for a couple of days, but then, you have to get up and go on with life. As I've said, I've had some other tragedies in my life too. You just have to carry on.
Mhm.
And I've been fine, but recently a man took interest in me. I haven't looked at a man in 3 years, 3.5 years. It's like, ugh, no. But he was really attractive and um, started calling me every day. And then one day he didn't call me. And I panicked. And I realized, I mean, it took me a while to realize this. It was a flashback. And the flashbacks that I have had are not to the moment, they are the feeling you had in that moment wells up in you
Mhm.
and you recognize it. This is how I felt when X happened.
Mhm.
And this feeling of sudden, unexpected abandonment just made me crazy.
Mhm.
And the poor guy, you know, I was just, I treated him as if I didn't treat him as if he'd done something wrong. I said, "You didn't call yesterday." I would never have said that before that Terry
Mm, mhm.
uh, killed himself, because I wouldn't have that feeling coming up in me.
Mhm.
And at this time, 3.5 years later, I'm having more trouble with my emotions than I have over the past 3.5 years.
Mm.
And um, I have friends who have told me that it's really 5 years before you can, before it fades enough that you can enter into a decent relationship.
Mm, mhm.
I'm sure some people do have it, but for me, and I wasn't expecting that at all. I was completely unexpected. And I couldn't understand where this feeling was coming from. It's like a panic attack. You
Mhm.
just have no control over it. It's only emotion. There's no brain in it at all. My brain had been taking me along for all these years, and suddenly, uh-uh, all of this came up. So naturally, when repressed emotions like this come up, it's really sort of a gift.
Mhm.
You have to face them. In my Buddhist practice, I meditate,
Mhm.
and they say, sit with your pain,
Mm.
and you have to sit there. And the natural feeling is to get up and divert yourself, but you sit there for 10 minutes, then you sit there for 20 minutes, then you can sit there for an hour with the pain. And when that happens, it begins to integrate itself into your mind and your body. And your body, particularly, there are places in your body where emotions are stored. It begins to fade. So I view that episode as this kind of gift. It's a healing gift, but it was very painful to me,
Mhm.
and I have to watch out because I don't know. Given the other trauma that I have experienced, I don't know how vulnerable I am, and so I have to be watchful, I think. But this experience, though very painful and unexpected, has been strengthening for me. So I can't say I'm glad it happened, but it was it made me better.
Mm, mhm. And for Terry, um, do you feel a sense of, um did you feel a sense of that he left or abandoned you, or did you feel a sense of empathy for his suffering, or both at the same time?
I felt everything.
Yeah.
I am just deeply compassionate toward him or toward anyone. You know, there have been transgender people in the world ever since the world began. they are not going to change. It is up to us to figure out a place for every member of the tribe. Everybody has a place, and it's up to us to find their place, because they are in a position that's not, male and female are what our whole civilization is built on. So being in between, and whether you felt you were a woman from the time you were 5 or 10 or 15, you still have been raised as a boy and change into a woman. So a lot of your training has been as a boy, and that's never goes away. So, there are people who can understand both sides of the story, and they have something to give. And we have not discovered what that is yet as a culture. I shied away from transgender women in the beginning, but now I've known quite a few, and I find them very refreshing to talk to. They have a unique point of view. They have a kind of patience. The ones that I have known have had a kind of patience and understanding that I don't find elsewhere. And it is our assignment as everybody else, not only partners, but the whole society, to find a place for these people, to make a place, to make space for them. And I feel tremendous compassion for people who are struggling against a society that just doesn't want to accept so many things that are simply facts of life. Mm-hmm. And I feel a sense of betrayal that Terry never told me, really. But I also feel gratitude in a way, that, he sacrificed himself for our marriage, and how could I not love him? He loved me. And I have never been loved before since like that, including by my parents or my children. Mm-hmm. He really deeply loved me. And I'm so sorry that this happened. And sometimes that's all you can say is, I'm sorry it happened. It's not my fault. I didn't cause it. I couldn't cure it. But I still am very sorry that it turned out this way.
Well, Anne, I think that's a poignant note to leave it on for this this podcast. And for what it's worth, we're sorry too. And for all you've been through. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing such a nuanced, difficult story with us. And I just want to give a shout out to your website and where people can find your book. So can you give us your website? And we'll also put that in the show notes.
Yeah, the customary www. Mm-hmm. AnneAndersonEvans.com.
And it's Anderson, Anderson.
And it's Anne, ANN.
Got it.
Anderson with an O.
Got it.
And the book is called The Sweet Pain of Being Alive.
The Sweet Pain of Being Alive by Anne Anderson Evans. Well, we hope our listeners will go acquire that book and read it. It's always important we're always saying, straight spouses, partners of trans people are always saying, we need to get our stories out there more. Like, we need people to understand and hear from our perspective what it is like to live on the other side of a closet. Because
if I can add just one word in there in that regard, I thought, who's going to want to read a book about suicide and transgenderism? It's like, hey, you want this book? I can't tell you how many people have written to me and said, I have bought several copies of this to send to people who I think should read it.
Yeah.
I am surprised. I thought that people would shy away from this, but they are not. They are embracing it. And I'm glad about that.
Well, we wish you luck and success with this book and in your future endeavors and life, and if relationship shows up again with that as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. Be on the lookout for all new episodes in 2024 as they come out. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can find us wherever you get yours. This is a friendly reminder that the views of the host, yours truly, are not necessarily the views of Our Path or its board of directors. I want to thank our engineer and editor, Adam, here at Play Audio Agency in Cincinnati, Ohio. And this is Kristen. Until next time, reminding you, keep using your voice.